All right, welcome to Tuesday, May 14th, 2019 regular business meeting of the East Bay Mud Board of Directors. The Planning and Legislative Human Services Committees met earlier today and will be reported under item 14. Roll call.
Directors Coleman.
Present.
Katz.
Present.
Linney.
Here.
Director McIntosh is excused. Director Mellon.
Present.
Patterson.
Present.
President Young is excused.
Great. So, Legion, pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have one announcement from the closed session. The board in closed session this morning, by unanimous vote of the directors attending, authorized the general counsel to initiate legislation in one matter. The action, defendants, and other particulars will be disclosed upon inquiry once the action is formally commenced. There are no other announcements from closed session. To initiate litigation in one matter, is that what I say?
Yes, I hope it says litigation on that because
What did I say?
legislation.
Legislation, oh, I'm sorry.
That's not in our job description just yet.
Authorized to initiate litigation in one matter. All right. Anyone here for public comment? I do have 4 public comment cards. We will start with Mr. Maganis.
Hello, good afternoon. Nathan Maganis, 317 Leicester Avenue, Oakland. Hey, they cut our water off 45 days ago. It's a month and a half now. It's a large building, 4 stories over a garage. We'll be building some improvements there. We've had water there, domestic services for 100 years. And we're paying duty every month, following your regulations, trying to figure out what it is that they wanted. They say something you need to apply for. We want you to, a new application for a different meter. We did that, we followed the rules. They say, look, you're violating Regulation 15, we looked through, we couldn't find anything. I don't think we pointed out to them, we wrote letters that we're not in violation of any regulation of your rules. Silence, please. I want you to file an application. We filed the application, we provided plans and what have you. It's a very severe matter to be without water. It's a big building, lots of people, occupants, residents, users, what have you. I mean, this is not a way to run a utility. I mean, it's like someone trying to get their attention, you grab their tie, you throw them down, okay, we got your attention. But why can't we be without water in the interim, you know? The excuses start, so-and-so is on training, the yard is busy, and what have you. You know what? In 26 weeks, you're gonna get some water. What is this? Please, they keep referring to the board. We're here in front of the board. We need help. This is not a way to address things. I mean, these are gangster tactics. We follow your rules. We pay your dues. We're ratepayers for decades, century, predecessors and interest ourselves. Why can they not at least connect the regular meters, put it back? We're so quick to take them out. It's very simple. Put the meters back until you have your new service. We followed your rules. Please help.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So, if my recommendation would be that Mr. Magnanis take an opportunity to talk with our manager of customer and community services, Andrew Lee, and then we can provide a written report on the situation for the board so you can understand both sides.
All right, and has he met with Andrew before? Or?
They've been in communication on the phone before. And Andrew, I don't believe that you've...
Good afternoon. So I have been in communication with Mr. McGonis for probably over a year and a half already about the district's requirement Just a quick background. The lot that Mr. McGonis is redeveloping is,
Actually, in terms of you getting into background and the like, I think that needs to be a report, but not something that we get into here.
For information to provide a summary report for the board and then follow up with additional information as
I
required.
think that would be appropriate under public comment rules. Counselor?
Right, go ahead.
No, you can ask questions, you just can't deliberate or,
Oh, is that?
Right, that's what my thinking was, that we can't deliberate. I mean, I would like to have some more information now if possible. He's made the trip here, and I'm glad that he's able to meet with you face to face, but I'd be interested just to hear.
sure, just really quick. The current lot that's being redeveloped is, have 2 existing single-family homes on those lots. Mr. McGonis have basically torn those down and rebuilding a apartment building that consists of 41 units. And that triggers a change in use review under our regulations. And that's what we advise Mr. McGonis is to go through that process to make sure that the new water demand is being addressed and paid for.
Thank you. I didn't know whether it was a new building or old building. This is very helpful.
We're talking about what, a larger meter?
It would be a larger meter, and it would be a net increase in the SEC.
And is the building occupied? That's the impression I got.
I have no information showing that the building is occupied because we've been in communication with the city of Oakland, and we've been informed there has no been occupancy permit issue at this point.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Yvette Rivera.
Thank you, Board. I provided you with a document. It has 3 exhibits in it. I'm just going to read through quickly. I'm going to start from the bottom of the top page. I am going to amend this to correct 2 typos that I have in it. Exhibit 3 is the status of vegetation management in my region. We're severely behind. Please consider raising the Civicor contract to meet the demand of vegetation that is growing exponentially because of rains. I only have 4 employees to manage Civicor and perform mowing, spraying, and string trimming duties. And this is the map of my zone, and it's in the highest populated area of East Bay Mud, and I think all of you have an area in the section that I cover from San Pablo down to Castro Valley. So the last document provides a list of what I gave my group last week about what was completed already and what is pending. And typically, I'm pretty much done with all of the areas by July the 1st before the strike hits the 4th of July coals. But unfortunately, we're so behind. I'm looking at August and getting everything completed. Number 2 is the Exhibit 2 is the East Bay Mud Construction Division roles for foremen, assistant superintendents, and superintendents. Under assistant superintendents are a multitude of duties I perform. One of those duties that I ceased performing is providing SME input on design review. I assume the result of no SME in East Bay Mud providing this input will be evident on how the projects look in the coming years. Regardless, please ask my superintendent and supervisor to cease asking me my opinion on engineering designs if the district does not want to include this duty in my job description. The requests come to me from engineers or the contractor relaying East Bay Mud's questions to me. And then the last thing is, since I no longer report to superintendent, I'd like to know if the facility supervisor placed above me in the chain of command would consider not forcing me to pull my limited resources from the field into West Oakland on trips to Fleet or to answer questions that I can address myself. And there's a short explanation underneath that. The typo in this last sentence is, I hope after reviewing my application and the supplemental answers in the Exhibit 1 that you can see that I'm fully capable of using allotted resources to accomplish management's goals if I have the control over those allotted resources. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mark Foley.
Good afternoon, President Lenny, Vice President Lenny, Acting President Lenny, and members of the board. I provided a packet to the Secretary regarding Delta Airlines. As some of you may be aware, this last weekend, there was a number of articles regarding some anti-union flyers that they have been putting out to their employees. One specifically that I called out was, your union dues cost around $700 a year. A new video game system with the latest hits sounds like fun. Put your money towards that instead of paying dues to the union. Obviously, they are not very union friendly at the moment, and I would ask that the district consider letting staff know that we should not use Delta Airlines for district travel. This is the same approach we took last year when there was a strike at the Marriott. I think it is warranted for these individuals. There are employees that are simply trying to join a union, and I don't think that the district should support this behavior by management. So I'd ask that you direct staff to not use Delta, and that we send a letter to Delta letting them know our position. Thank you.
Thank you. What's our procedure?
No, I would caution you cannot direct action.
Yeah, no, there was a question.
Yeah.
What was our procedure for directing if we chose to do so?
You can put the matter on agenda for future consideration, or you can ask for a report from the general manager as to what the recommendation would be. But for any action to be taken, it needs to be on an agenda.
A question related to that, to what Doug's getting to. Based on what you've heard, could the general manager provide a written report on what the options are and how to go about it?
Yes, but for the general manager to get direction from the board, it would need to be decided by the board in open session. So you can give the general manager, well, I'd avoid giving the general manager any direction today.
Well, I'm not saying given direction, I'm leaving it up to him to determine what he thinks is the best course of action, how and why.
I'm happy to, I mean, this has just come up, haven't had a chance to really reflect on it, to take some time, look at it, try to understand what it might mean in terms of implications for the district and how it would interface with procedures that we currently have related to travel and accounting and that sort of thing. So, and then I'll get back to the board with some written information and potentially a recommendation. Does that sound okay?
If that's what you feel like doing. I'm not directing you to do it.
And that's what we'll do, hearing no additional input.
All right, thank you very much. Our last speaker is Peter McGinnis.
Good afternoon, board members. Thanks for having me here today. I wanted to touch back on the first matter that you heard regarding the building where the water was cut off. I understand that there's a process that has been worked on and that we're going through to decide what new meters may need to go in place, what the old ones mean, what credit we have, what the payments are. There's a lot of efforts and discussions that do go into those, and Mr. Lee, we've been in communication with him and we have discussed those. The problem that we have is that East Bay Mud has cut off the water unilaterally without letting these deliberations go through, and while these deliberations are going through, we have a time period that we cannot control. 26 weeks we're being told without water. Two things, if I may say. The manner in which it was cut off was done unilaterally. There's nothing we could do about it. It affected the occupants and the users, the workers, security, sanitation, all kinds of different requirements that we have to upkeep and maintain this property. And it was done in a way that was not explained. We sent numerous emails to the general manager and new business development representatives trying to get an explanation for why and under what authority this has been done. And unfortunately, we have gotten silence, received only silence from Mr. Lee and from the new business development as to why and how this is allowed to be done. And the second thing I want to say is that this is, so we ask that this is done after the fact while these deliberations are being done. The second thing I want to say is the repercussions of this. We've had occupants in there, we have people in there, we have requirements to keep this place sanitized and clean. People can't take showers, they can't flush toilets, they can't clean up animal feces and urine, and it's a serious matter. You can imagine what it's like living in a third world country without running water, to be able to clean. It smells in this place. It's a basic human necessity and right, the way that we live. This is a modern world. We're in Oakland, California. We're not in the desert or something like that. I don't know what to say. But it's really, really drastically affecting the community and all the occupants' daily lives and our ability to keep this place clean while we are trying to deal with the different hurdles and requirements of the new business department and through the different departments. And so while we have been in contact with Mr. Lee, while all these things are going on, I specifically asked that the board take action and have our old meters receive any information as to what's going on or how that's happening. And we don't have any control over when they will be reinstalled. And in the meantime, we have a severe problem. And Mr. Lee said that we don't have occupation, a permit from the city. Well, that's a catch-22. We don't have one because the meters were pulled. Everyone before them was okay. Everything was okay. But at this moment, we don't have one. It's a catch-22. So I would urge the board to please reinstall this meter while we are dealing with Mr. Lee and the new development. It's really, I want to say it politely, it's a gross situation over there. We can't clean up the
Thank you
road.
for bringing this to our attention. John, do you have a question?
A couple of questions if I could. I know we're going to get a written report from staff. So is it a new building, old building that we're talking about? It's two buildings, correct?
It's on 2 lots, but it's a new building.
And so the people who moved in when there was no running water?
There has always been running water until the meters have been cut off. We've been using those meters the entire time.
The meters that were with the property previously, the two
Correct,
lots,
yes.
those 2 single-family lots, so each had a meter, I guess.
So each of the 2 lots were then feeding the one building?
Yes.
And has the fire department, the reason I'm asking this, if it's a 4-story building and you had 2 buildings before, the fire department would need to be signing off on fire safety, correct? And so you'd have issues with, a potential issue, I would assume, to meter size and upgrading of meters, correct?
Regard specifically to the fire, our building was actually burned down as one of the buildings that were burned in the arson. And so thereafter, shortly thereafter, I made it a big issue with new development that they separate the fire service from the domestic water service. You know, it's your policy that you apply for all of it together, and you don't issue EBMUD the fire service separately from the domestic. But I was in the offices and made it a huge point. Said, listen, we're
So you
someone's running around out here burning down buildings.
So you do have water service?
We have the fire service, yeah.
In the building?
In the building, yes.
But you don't have water service for
Don't have the
sinks or
domestic,
toilets or showers?
Right. And we have a number of people working, living, security guards, dogs. It's just, there's no, since the water's been cut off at the beginning of April, you know, we haven't received an explanation. We haven't received, we just ask that the water is being turned back on while we go through this process in order to keep it humanely,
As you understood from our general counsel, we can't give direction from the DS. We can ask questions, that's why I asked the questions. I assume it's your father who is Mr. Lee right now. Hopefully that issue can get moved quickly, resolved quickly, and promptly, hopefully, to meet our requirements that we have as well. And so you can get your occupancy permits from the city of Oakland and have full restored water. But it sounds like it's really bureaucratic. I know that.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes reasons why things are bureaucratic from a health and safety standpoint and fire protection, but it looks like you dealt with the fire protection separately, which I'm surprised. But whatever, maybe that's allowed, I don't know.
So, I mean, I'll just, at some risk, provide additional information, because I may not have it perfectly, but this has been a conversation that's been going on for some time. There was, normally we don't provide fire service during construction, so this is 2 single-family residences, and now it's going to be a 41-unit multi-family 4-story building. It is already. So we worked with the McNonases to provide fire service during construction, but in advance to protect, given the arson event, but in advance of payment of SCCs or the completion of an application to provide for the potable water service. So it appears that based on the existing potable water service that was there for the 2 existing structures, that there's been some occupancy that's occurred, but it's ahead of the city of Oakland providing occupancy approval. So now, since there's been some delay in the application process and the payment of fairly significant SCCs, when you consider that it's a 41-unit development, that's a lot of multifamily units, that now it will take the time to be in queue because there are lots of other people who are telling us the same thing, how come it's taking so long, but you don't get in the queue until you pay the application. So we will work, and I know that Andrew is meeting now with Mr. McNonas, and we'll work to try to do the best that we can to get the water service back consistent with our regulations. That's very generally what's going on, and we'll follow up with a written report. And thank you.
If I may just ask, if you could put in the report the explanation and the authority for why you cut the water as well, because we've been waiting to hear anything from you guys relating to that. I mean, you guys cite Regulation 15, which is basically, in my mind, the equivalent of having a mortgage on a home or being a renter, and saying, you know, the bank or the landlord can kick you out for not paying rent, and you're saying we're using this rule, but we've paid rent, we've paid the banking. Like, great, you can use that rule, but you need to give us the grounds for why you're using that rule. You cite a rule that says we are allowed to take out your service if you haven't paid or for certain rules, but we've paid, we've done everything, so we still don't have a basis for your actions, and that's why we're here. Yes, we're working with you, and we cannot control these long periods, but in the interim, we have requirements from state, we have health requirements, we have security requirements, we have community neighbors who are, yes, and thank you for putting the fire service in. That was very helpful. We have an entire community around us that are looking to us to protect this building while there's nobody there from fire. And we have all these requirements that we need to make sure that our neighborhood and our community and our places is being taken care of. So I understand the delays, I understand the bureaucracy, I understand these things need to be sorted out. But specifically, while they are sorted out, we need water. Please.
So just one last question. So the people who are there now are not paying tenants. They're workers or security people or those that
various different ones, yeah. But it's some people that were there, have since been, there's a catch-22 with the city of Oakland. We can't, anybody that was there before is not allowed to be there now because we don't have water. And we can't get occupancy without the water, so it's...
All right, well, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I hope we can get it cleared up soon. Thank you. I don't have any other speaker cards. Anyone else? Last call. All right, so we're on to our consent calendar.
I'll move items 1 through 6 and 9 because I'd like to pull 7 and 8.
Okay, so items 7 and 8 will be pulled, and the rest of the calendar is motioned. Go to second for that. Second. All right. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? Carries unanimously. Item 6.
And you have to go to page 43, sorry, wait a second. Went way too far there.
Is authorize a contract and agreement related to purchasing and refurbishing ball valves for the district's main wastewater treatment plant influent pump system.
Almost there.
There's not legislation this time.
No.
So this is item, I understand that there's a question about items 7 and 8. Item number 7 is an agreement with Pacific States Environmental Contractors to increase the amount that we're allowing for the trench soils removal.
Yes,
program.
thank you, just found it there. It takes me a while to flip through it all. I just want to, I know that we have a lot of trench spoils, we're going to have more due to an increased amount of pipe that we're putting into the ground to replace. I'm hoping that if they're clean enough trench spoils that we're looking at and working with the entities that are trying to do wetland restoration where they need sediment and dirt. There's not enough to be for what's happening around the bay for climate change and protection of assets. There's also a way that we could potentially make money off of that, or at least not have to spend money to dispose of that suitable for wetland restoration work.
And so I'll just respond in the affirmative that as the district expands its pipeline rebuild effort, that we'll have ever increasing, even though we're seeking to be more efficient, as we increase, we'll have additional soils. Currently, we generate about 80,000 cubic yards a year of soil. And so while this contract can proceed in coordination with SFEI and SPUR and the others who are looking at developing wetlands to address wave action associated with sea level rise.
Well, the one to talk to is not necessarily SPUR to a degree, it's SFEI, but it's the Coastal Conservancy.
And the Coastal Conservancy, thank you. So we are participating in those discussions and we have the material available when the time is right. Thank you for connecting that to it.
And number 8 is the agreement for the Ballpark project in Oakland. I found the comment that, I mean, it's going to be a lot more water, which is fine, but I would like to make sure that we are requiring dual piping and taking a much stronger position if it's economically feasible for recycled water on that project. The 2 write-ups in here were, I thought, not strong enough on that language. And I would like to see, as we're working through the agreement with the Oakland A's and the Port of Oakland and other entities, that dual piping be put in where appropriate. And secondarily, that we have really are pushing recycled water. I mean, our facilities aren't that far away. It's less than a mile away from the site. And there could be opportunities for a lot of recycled water that currently we are discharging into the bay to be used on that site.
And so yes, we have information in both the BD1 and the water supply assessment report, the letter back that we'll be sending back to the City of Oakland to that effect. It is a little lighter than you might have wanted to see, in part because this is moving very quickly, and as it relates to what is being proposed by the A's and as part of development, we're not exactly sure yet what it's going to look like, but we will, as you say, push to advance recycling.
Well, we know that what the Port of Oakland approved yesterday is a 4-year time frame for the EIR process, so it is moving forward, and I don't know what the additional costs are, but certainly in the Coliseum complex, one would think putting purple pipe in to the restrooms there would not be overly expensive, and it might be actually good for the Oakland A's to talk about what they're doing from an environmental perspective in that realm.
Thank you. We'll definitely engage with them.
And I agree with John. I think that it's not just this water supply assessment, but I think in general the water supply assessments that we've been preparing for project applicants have not been reserving enough jurisdiction for EBMUD's recycled water program, and I think that we could be drafting mitigation measures that would be part of environmental impact reports and mitigated negative declarations that reserve a requirement to use recycled water where appropriate, or something to that effect, to make sure that we are referring proponents that are within the service area of East Bay Shore or an applicable recycled water project to be making use of it. So I'd like to refer that issue as more of a, both for revisions to this water supply assessment, but also for the way we approach water supply assessments similarly throughout the service areas of our facilities.
Yeah, which is ironically, we had our special Derwa meeting last night, and part of our problem with Derwa and San Ramon Valley is we don't have enough recycled water during peak periods anymore. It's been so successful on being able to bring the purple pipe into the San Ramon Valley and to Oakland and to and down Pleasanton, but we don't have the peak periods enough commodity. Maybe a different situation on this side with our wastewater treatment plant being located, down the street, so to speak.
But this is an opportunity with a new facility that where dual plumbing can work. We don't have an irrigation or landscape plan for this project yet, so there may be opportunities that were not possible at this phase of commenting. But I don't see anything in this letter that would require further consultation with the district to implement these measures.
And with that, I'll move items 7 and 8. Thank you for getting back on the responses, by the way.
Second?
Does the approval of item 8 refer our comments to the staff for incorporation before sending?
Well, it looks like the one letter's already gone to the city. I think, I'll take a page from, I guess, from the Port of Oakland, what I read in the paper today. They're going to be in long discussions with the Oaklandaise on the agreement at Howard Terminal, and I think this is something that could be added in the discussions and made a selling point to talk about the environmental benefits and maybe helping get some of their political support they need from the environmental community in addition to. But it's already gone out. At least to the city.
It's in draft form here, attached, subject to the board's approval of the water supply
I
assessment.
would just ask that it be strengthened, and maybe the caveat is if economically feasible, and something to that effect.
Yeah, I would vote for an approval that would reflect the general nature of board members' comments, and I don't need to see the document again, except by communication.
Thank you.
Do I have a second? Still missing a second here. On motion for items 7 and 8 approval.
Second.
Mike seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion's carried unanimously. All right, on to item 10.
Marlene will provide the legislative report.
We had, she's walking up there, we had a really contentious meeting today.
John, anytime you're in a meeting, it can be contentious. Of course.
Good afternoon. Would you like to say anything
Well, what I
more?
can say is that the committee fully endorsed and supported the staff recommendations that we have before us. How's that?
Thank you. Would you like to hear a presentation on each of the bills?
Any bills in particular anyone wants to hear something about?
Well, actually, there's one, AB 1588. We had a follow-up report on operators. If AB 1588 does pass, that could help us in terms of recruitment for positions at the district.
Yeah, I can just tell you briefly what it does. I'm shouting at you. AB 1588 would add veterans to the list of people that are eligible to have their service, their experience with wastewater and water treatment operation considered when they're applying for certification with the State Water Board. Right now, they do reciprocity with other states. This would add military veterans and their military experience to that.
I'll move item 10, the staff recommendations.
Motion by John, second by Bill. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Carries unanimously.
A couple of update items for you. Recently, you may have heard that the governor issued an executive order related to water, and I just wanted to give you a quick overview of it and let you know next steps from their perspective. The order is broad. It would require the secretaries of the Natural Resources Agency, Food and Agriculture, and Cal EPA to come up with a water resilience portfolio to meet the water needs of the 21st century. And he's got some specifics here on what they should inventory and assess. It includes items like demand on water, water quality, projected water needs, and some other items. And then sets forth some principles to look at when developing the portfolio. Multi-benefit approaches, natural infrastructure, innovation and new technologies, looking at regional approaches, looking elsewhere to see what's been successful and incorporating other approaches into California's approach, strengthening partnerships, and then active stakeholder engagement to hear from those in the water community, in the environmental community, agriculture, academia, business, and others, environmental justice as well, to hear their perspective as the secretaries put this portfolio together. Nancy Vogel has been appointed to lead the effort through the Resources Agency, and they're starting the outreach now, and it looks like their target is to have something put together by the end of this year. So that's that news item. Any questions on that before I move to federal? Okay. At the federal level, we will be back to you in July with some items for consideration. The subcommittees and committees on the House side are working on infrastructure bills, and we expect to see the markups from those committees coming out within the next month or so. On the SRF front, their target is probably the end of June for a markup. And then on the resources front, same time on the target. The resources, they've got a few bills in front of them. One is a bill that Representative Carter just came out with. Another one is a measure that Representative Napolitano has on recycled water funding. We're expecting to see a merge of those bills. The committee bill will then represent those, and that's what we intend to bring to you in July on both of these. Both of them represent an approach to provide funding for recycled water, funding for the SRF, and to recognize the need for water infrastructure. Also at that time, we're looking at information on the Green New Deal to bring to you. Any questions?
I asked this question at Aqua Federal Affairs Committee last Tuesday, whether or not the water side could be brought into the infrastructure bill. And what I heard back from Garrett Durst, who used to work for Congressman Garamendi, was that he doesn't see that happening because of the recent ORDA and WIN legislation, and that it's probably going to be a year to 2 years out. Are you hearing that as well?
For what? For the
bringing more water into the infrastructure side of the...
Yeah, I think so. I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of discussion on the budget overall, and we've got kind of new players, and so they're trying to get their markers in and do some of the traditional things, the water recycling, the SRF, get that done, and then start looking bigger if they can get this through and get some funding levels raised.
Thank you.
All right, unless there's anything else, thank you very much, Marlene.
Thank you.
Okay, item 11.
So this is the second and final reading on changes to the East Bay MUD Employee Retirement System Ordinance. And Lisa Serrani's here again to provide us a reminder of what this is about before we ask the board to take action.
All right, thank you, board members. Today we're here to consider an amendment to the East Bay MUD Retirement System Ordinance number 40. Beginning. So section 21 provides for an optional modification of a member's retirement allowance to provide an actuarially equivalent allowance for a surviving beneficiary. The actuarially assumed rate of return is used to calculate the optional beneficiary allowance in this section 21 of our ordinance. It also impacts cash outs and posting of interest to employee accounts. The plan actuary recommended a change to the actuarially assumed rate of return at the September 20th, 2018 Retirement Board meeting as part of their 2018 annual actuarial evaluation. And the Retirement Board adopted the proposed rate at that September 20th, 2018 meeting. So there are IRS regulations that require that the actuarial assumptions that are used to determine the optional forms of benefits be very specifically stated in our retirement ordinance. So the proposed update to the retirement ordinance, which is section 21, ensures that the language is consistent with the change adopted by the Retirement Board on September 20th. The steps that are taken to finalize the adoption of the retirement ordinance amendment. We had our first reading on April 23rd, 2019. Today is our second reading and you will vote to adopt. Then the ordinance amendment must be placed in the newspaper for 2 successive weeks. And then the adoption of the ordinance amendment will take effect 30 days after the vote to adopt. So staff will then publish and distribute copies of the updated and revised ordinance by June 30th of 2019.
I have a quick question, Lisa.
Yes.
Why is it after we adopt this today, then we put it in the newspaper for 2 weeks? So you would think if you put it in the newspaper, you'd put it in before you adopt.
Well, I think you vote to say you want it to happen, and then you get additional, but maybe somebody from legal could answer the question, because I don't actually know the answer.
It's just to provide notice to the public. It's not the same as asking them to come in and weigh in when you're adopting the change to the ordinance. It's just giving everyone fair notice of what the ordinance says.
So from a transparency standpoint, I mean, I am in agreement with what we're doing here today. Would it not make more sense so the public, we publish it before we take the second vote? So if somebody wanted to weigh in one way or the other, they are aware, maybe to a greater degree?
That's the reason why you have 2 readings of it and notice in the agenda.
That's assuming, of course, that people are looking at our agenda.
Right, well, that's an assumption we rely on quite a bit.
We rely on that with the pipeline.
I know that. But
and the publication after adoption is by law. So it's not, it's just not something we're making up.
No, I know that. I was just wondering from a transparency standpoint, if we're taking an action, that would it make sense to put it in before the second reading? That's all I'm saying.
We're good on the law.
I know we're good on the law. I was just asking, I thought, a logical question. Apparently it's not.
I would move to adopt the retirement ordinance.
All right, Frank, moved, a motion by Frank Mellon.
Finish your presentation.
Oh, I think that was the
Is
end.
that the last one?
That was
Okay.
the last slide. Yep.
Seconded by Bill Patterson. Any other further discussion?
I would just point out this is part of our very positive move to help the stability of the retirement plan and also make it so that as we go out to the public, we can say that we're not using phony baloney type of assumptions. We're using something that's real. We have some more to do, but this is something that we started at 8.25%, as I recall, a while back, and that was so unrealistic, it was ridiculous. We just got lucky for a while that we were making that. But this is getting towards a more realistic number, and going forward, it will help provide more security for the retirees and for the ratepayers.
All right, ready to vote then? All in favor? Aye.
Does that do roll call?
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstention? Carries unanimously. And we're on to item 12.
Yes, so this is an opportunity for our Director of Finance to make a presentation. Should copy at your places, be queuing up an action for the board to consider filing a report and setting the hearing for water and wastewater system rates and charges and other fees.
Good afternoon. We're here today to file the General Manager's report on water and wastewater rates and charges, also capacity fees and other fees, and also to set the public hearing date for our Prop 218 rates and charges in particular. So on our agenda, we'll cover the calendar for our budget and rates. We'll go over the Proposition 218 rates and charges, as well as the other fees, charges, and regulations, and then go over briefly our next steps. So in terms of our calendar, we held our first budget workshop on January 22nd, our second budget workshop on March 26th, where we covered the proposed biennial budget for fiscal years 20 and 21, in addition to the fiscal years 20 and 21 Proposition 218 rates and charges. We did mail the Proposition 218 notice. Those were all mailed by April 26th, so hopefully all of you received them in your mailboxes. And if you didn't, please let us know. And we are now having the board meeting where we are formally filing the General Manager's report on rates and charges. And we will set the hearing date for June 11th of 2019. And those charges would go into effect for fiscal year 20 on July 1 of 2019. And then again, the charges for fiscal year 21 will be proposed for July 1 of the subsequent year. So now on to the Proposition 218 rates and charges. So the increase in the revenue requirements are resulting in rates and charges for 20 and 21 of 6.5% and 6.25% for water. Now again, those are less than we had projected when we looked out into the 20 and 21 period 2 years ago. We have been looking at 7 and 7%, and despite the fact that we actually are seeing lower water sales than we had anticipated at the time, strong management results and strong capacity fee revenue has resulted in our being able to move forward with a recommendation under the 7% that we had projected at that time. For fiscal year 20, for the wastewater rates and charges, the revenue requirement is going up by 4% in each of those 2 years. However, there was a wastewater cost of service study that was performed, and the wastewater cost of service study resulted in some changes, slightly more increased costs as a result of increased loadings when we did recent sampling to the non-residential sector of wastewater treatment rates and charges, and a slight decrease correspondingly on the residential side. So the average single-family home, will cover this again on a further slide. We'll see an impact net homeowner of the treatment and the wet weather facility charge of under 3%. All of these are consistent with board policy and with state law, the California Constitution. And in addition, we'd like to point out that Schedule L, our drought rate surcharge schedule, will remain in effect, although we don't expect a water shortage in the next year. So currently it's stage 0, which is the 0% surcharge. So again, if we look at a kind of summary over here, we see that the water proposed rates and charges are 6.5, 6.25. When we look out over the next 3 years projected after that, we are at the same 5% that we've been projecting for a number of years. On wastewater, these are the same rate increases that we had been projecting prior, and so we look across and we still have 4% going forward. So when we look at the monthly water and wastewater charges and the impacts on the average single-family residential customer, we'll see for an 8 CCF or HCF per month customer that our current bill is just a little over $56 per month, and that at the end of fiscal years 20 and 21, with those increases, we would be seeing a bill just under $64 per month. Again, the 8 HCF user is actually higher than our median user, which is closer to 6 HCF. On the wastewater side, the average customer at 6 CCF, and again, that represents users on the west side of our service area, will see a treatment charge at the end of the 2 rate increases of approximately $23. That would be the impact on the bill. In addition to that, there is a wet weather facilities charge bill that we'll see after we cover the non-residential charges. And so then again, that net impact to the homeowner of about 3% overall. So when we look at the range of users on the water side, if we look at a very low user, the 25th percentile, 4, all the way up through the 95th percentile, 24, at the end of the 2 years of rate increases, the 25th percentile customer at 400 cubic feet per month would see a bill of about $45 per month, and the large user in the 95th percentile would see a monthly bill of just over $170 per month. So when we look at the water flow charges, so what makes up those costs that roll up into that bill, we have no changes to the actual rate structure. We still have 3 tiers, tier 1 up to 700 cubic feet, tier 2 usage between 7 and 1600 cubic feet, and then tier 3, which is used over that 1600 cubic feet. And so again, you'll see those charges and the impacts. There's some slight changes as a result of rounding because there are pennies involved, et cetera. And then we see the multifamily, residential, commercial, and industrial. Those don't have tiers because, as you might imagine, it would be difficult to create a tier structure when you have such variability in the number of units, for example, in a multifamily residential building or in a commercial-sized facility. On the non-potable side, recycled, there's again a slight decrease over potable charges, and that's been a part of our history of rates, and that continues to be the case, a discount for non-potable recycled water. And then we have our elevation surcharge, and that's to serve both pressure zones 2 and pressure zones 3. So there are zone 1 customers on both sides of our hills, and there are also zone 2 and 3 customers in those areas. And the pressure zone, the elevation surcharge covers not only the electricity for the pumping, but also the costs of operating and maintaining the pumping plants that serve those facilities, in addition to the capital that's needed essentially to rebuild those facilities. So when we look at our water service charges, there are other components as well. There's the private water service, fire service charge, and then the water service charge that's the flat fee that's paid by single-family, multifamily residential, and other customers. So you'll see the impacts here, and again, roughly the 6.5% and 6.25% impacts over the course of the next 2 years. On the single-family residential side, on the wastewater side, again, we see the 6 HCF as the average user, and we had covered that on a prior slide, so about $23 per month at the end of the 2 years of rate increases. And the maximum on the single-family residential side of 9. And as a reminder, the reason why we have a maximum on the wastewater single-family residential bill is because at some point when we look at winter water use, there's no more water that's actually being treated at the plant. The rest of that water use over 9 is assumed to be irrigation, outdoor water use, and we're not treating that, and we certainly wouldn't want to charge our customers a cost to treat water that we weren't actually treating. So when we cover the non-residential wastewater treatment rates, you'll see some of these increases are over the 4% that we talked about. And that's a result of the cost of service study, which showed that when we looked at actual sampling from residential and non-residential, that there actually is slightly more loading being treated at the plant from the non-residential sector. And that's, again, why we have cost of service studies periodically every 10 years at least per board policy. So when we look at wet weather facilities charges, and so again, this is a charge that is not on our regular water bill and wastewater bill, but that's part of our the property taxes of those that are living in the western part of our service area within the boundaries of SD1. We have a small, medium, and large lot. Most of our lots actually fall in the small category because, again, on the west side of the hills, which is where our SD1 boundaries lay, most lots are small. And the increase after the 2 years of rate increases, and again, this has been subject to the cost of service, which is why the increases are over 4% on the wet weather facilities charge piece. $115 per year would be the new charge on the tax bill, and that's up from the current $104 roughly dollars. So when we look at agency considerations, we'll note first of all that we are using an 8 HCF average. This is down from our pre-drought historic average of 10 and down from 2007's usage, which was actually 12 HCF per month. So pretty dramatic drop in usage over time. And again, as a reminder, our average use varies by the agency. San Francisco is going to be very different than, Palo Alto or other areas, including Oakland. Climate variation and demographics also play into that, of course. So when we look at the comparison for 800 cubic feet over the course of our local peers, we fall roughly in the middle of this particular group. Understanding, of course, that it's very difficult to show an apples and apples comparison. San Francisco would say, hey, 8 HCF is not the average use for a San Francisco home, but if we were to show it a different way, there would be additional issues there. So as best as possible, we fall in the middle of what we see as our peers. When we look on the wastewater slide, it's slightly more complicated. So again, our average of 6 HCF or CCF per month is what we're showing here. And the blue is the representation of the EBMUD treatment and wet weather portions of the charge. And the rest of that represents the average collection system charge. The actual collection system charge would, of course, vary depending on the community you lived in. Piedmont would be different than Oakland, would be different than Albany, etc. So we're falling in the top third, but again, most of that bill is not a bill that we can control as East Bay Med. So when we look at the impact of declining water use on the single-family bill, what we see is while our rate increases have been larger than 5%, that when you actually look at wrapping in the decline in water use, that our average bill increase has only been around 5%, 4.8% if you say fiscal year 7 through 19, and with the new rate increases that we're wrapping in, it rounds up to about 5%. So now we'll cover the non-Proposition 218 rates and charges, capacity fees, and other fees. So when we look at our water system capacity fees, per discussion and direction from the board on March 26th, there will be no rate changes for fiscal year 20. We'll be awaiting the results of the current water demand study and updating the capacity fee study. We'll send an RFP out this fall. Hopefully that demand study will be completed by December, so hopefully by the time spring rolls around, we can go ahead and get going. And we're hoping to bring back recommended capacity fees this time next year. With regards to the wastewater capacity fee study, that was wrapped into the 2019 rates and charges study, and the proposed increase is just over 5% from $2,610 to $2,750 per unit. And there's a new assessment process for non-residential units, and we'll cover that here. So when we look at the non-residential capacity fees, we're updating the process from a little sort of more complicated process both for staff and for our residents, and working with the consultants. Staff and the consultants came up with a recommendation to create 3 categories of non-residential strengths, a low, medium, and a high, and then look at water use to essentially come up with a pretty streamlined, simplified approach that really will be more transparent for our customers and easier for staff to implement. And when we looked at sort of how it compared with recent capacity fee studies, capacity fees that have been implemented for new businesses that have joined our system, it's either comparable or lower. So, with regards to our other proposed updates to rates, fees, and charges, we are changing the fees based on our actual cost recovery, so looking at the amount of time and the dollars per hour, including all of our costs here at the district for water account establishment, special service charges, installation charges, PRA fees, real property use fees, recreation fees, water service regulations, and wastewater fees, including industrial permits, testing, resource recovery, and other similar fees. That's all in the full report that has been provided to the board, and it's available on our website. With regards to other fees and charges, our water fees and charges, including the account establishment fee, some of our real use property fees, and other water regulations have all been updated as well. Schedules D, E, F, and G of our regulations have also been updated with regards to our installation charges. And there was a pretty comprehensive update that was completed in 2018 that resulted in quite a lot of fee increases. Working with the board made the recommendation to stagger those increases over 3 years. So the first set were implemented this last year, and so we're now in phase 2. And so we'll see the increases in the second phase of kind of large increase, and by the time next year is over, we'll have phased in the 100% of the increase. And this will result basically in fees that are very similar to those that our neighbors are already charging with respect to San Francisco and Contra Costa Water specifically. So when we look at our Schedule D, standard meter install paved costs, here's a range of laterals from 1 inch through 4 inch, and you can see the fee increases there for FY20. We can see here in Schedule E for private fire service meters, the installation charges for a 4-inch, 6-inch, and 8-inch. And when we look at Schedule F, public fire hydrant installation charges, again, increasing per our actual costs and number of hours. Schedule G are our main extension charges. This is work the district installs up to 1,000 feet. And you can see there's different surfaces, dirt or paved. There's materials also that change, and then the total kind of cost increases there for, again, year 2 phase-in. This is the main extension charge where the applicant is doing the work rather than the district. And then we have our real property use application fees. So these fees, again, have been updated based on the time and cost of district staff to complete title transfers, easements, leases and licenses, and permits including entry, encroachment, temporary construction, land use. So when we actually look at those fees themselves, you can see the current charge and then the proposed charge for FY20 for each of those categories. This is a continuation of the prior chart. And then when we talk now about other fees and charges on the wastewater side, again, we had said that there were changes in monitoring and testing fees and changes also in our private sewer lateral compliance fees. So this chart reflects all of those actual increases. And the PSL compliance fees increases. So most of them are less than $20 in this case. And then other fees, charges, and regulations also on the wastewater side, specifically changes to the resource recovery rates, encouraging a change in rates to encourage off-peak deliveries per feedback from the board during a recent committee meeting. And then also increases in our wastewater interceptor connection review inspection fee, which hadn't been increased since 2005. So with respect to recommended board actions and next steps, we are formally filing the general manager's report and recommendation and asking for support for that, and also requesting that we set a public hearing date for June 11th of 2019. I'm prepared to take any questions.
Any questions?
A couple. This is going to sound like a very odd question. Marijuana.
Yes.
I've been reading how the different regulatory agencies are trying to deal with the waste stream of that, and I suspect we probably have a lot of hydroponics growth in our service area. One, do we know where it is? Do we know, not to bust it, but just do we know where it is, and how's that fit into our scheme? Do you consider agricultural water, industrial water, and what happens with the discharge?
Yeah, I believe wastewater has been taking quite an active leadership role in this. That's all I'm asking Eileen to about this.
Sure. Actually, I led a roundtable discussion at the CASA conference earlier this year. I had the biggest attendance, but I told them, you came to my table, I'm not giving samples. So it was really about the discussion of what we're doing, and we've been leading the industry. We've issued over 24 permits to date. They've been really good. I mean, it's a true business that people are doing. They're not doing it under the table. And what we've been doing is monitoring. And to date, we haven't seen anything. Our biggest concern would be nutrients, as I've talked about the master plan and looking at nutrients. You know, with the largest discharges to nutrients in San Francisco Bay, it's a concern of the regulators. They just issued us our second watershed permit for nutrients last week. So the biggest concern is nutrients. They've been working with us. They're filing permits. They're on file. We're doing monitoring. The good news is to date, we have not seen any impacts, and we'll continue to monitor.
So what category are they when they're applying for water service? If they're doing hydroponics, I mean, if they're growing in open land, I guess it's different, but is it considered ag or industrial?
Well, as far as water, they're getting their water metered. From our end, it's ag. As far as from the wastewater, it's part of like our pre-treatment program is how we're looking upon it. And we've been engaged, and the state board's very interested in what we're doing.
Right.
We're getting a lot of interest. But to date, the good news I can report on is we haven't seen the impacts, but it's only beginning to take off. There's a lot of people who are pulling permits who are going to be building big warehouses in Oakland.
Oakland and Richmond, I read.
Yeah.
Also.
And Richmond's got a big, huge plan that was in the news last week.
I'm not sure if you misspoke when you said there's no water meter?
No, I said they're applying for water service. I said,
Oh,
and you know, they're applying for water service. That's a separate issue. What we're looking from the wastewater is what's coming to the plant. Is it going to impact the plant? It's really treated as part of our pre-treatment program.
And so, Andrew, could you help understand what the water supply category is?
So for the water, we have two categories. We have residential and non-residential. So they would fall into the non-residential water use. And so we looked at the total annual projected demand to size the water service for those use.
But they're not ag.
We don't have an ag for water, yeah.
Well, we have an irrigation classification. Is
Correct, but they fall into non-residential.
Because they're indoor?
Because they are outdoor and they're not used for residential use, single family.
Well, this is not a landscape irrigation business. This is a horticultural endeavor, and so it's commercial. But our categories are residential and non-residential, and within non-residential we have commercial, industrial, and the board sees that when we talk about conservation and water use, but we don't actually have categories. We just have non-residential, right?
Okay. Oh, so outdoor education, outdoor agricultural would be non-residential.
That would be correct.
Okay. I had a question on the wastewater side. For the as we're looking forward on the impacts to the wastewater treatment plant, not this particular agricultural product on its own, but do we have any distinction between agricultural use that might have a higher impact and agricultural use that might have a lower impact, depending on what's used in the development process that could impact wastewater development and nutrients? Perhaps pesticides would be a factor. Do we have a way of distinguishing high impact and low impact within the permit program?
Yeah, I mean, they give us information, they fill it out, then we monitor, and then we see, are they using particular pesticides that are increasing our nutrient loads? Is it something we need to tell them that they need to cut back on, that we can work with them on? And the good thing to date is everyone's been working with us. We're making them all aware that, you know, if we were to build, you know, nutrient treatment, full treatment, we're talking $2.4 billion in capital costs. So it's something we take very seriously, our pre-treatment program in dealing with nutrients. But right now, back to the marijuana growers, they're treated no differently than anybody else who's growing something within our service area. And we want to have that open dialogue just to learn about where our nutrients are coming from.
Right, and my question was, I think just to make a point that it would be great within the permit program to be able to provide incentives to any agricultural operation for any kind of agricultural product to have incentives for lower impact operations so that there's education about how to minimize impact.
Right, and that's something that we're doing through the education. We don't have, quote, a real incentive as far as anything financial right now, but they want to work with us. They want to, you know, they want to protect our infrastructure as much as they can, so they're working with us and engaging in a dialogue with us.
So for the future, if there is a way of separating the qualifications for that would be tangible to a monetary impact on the plant, or to an actual cost, a regulatory cost, or something along those lines, for all agricultural products, depending on their impact on the wastewater system, that would be something to explore in the future, if that's effective.
Right, and we'll be exploring that as part of the master plan, and thank you for approving the consultant contract today, because that's a big part of the master plan, is looking at how do we deal with nutrients, how do we deal with our resource recovery, how do we deal with our biosolids, and some of these things are competing against each other, so we will be looking at that, so thank you.
And just maybe for further information, so the way the wastewater fees are, they are established in each one of the business classification codes. So we're already pretty granular in terms of charging based on anticipated loads to the plant. And as wastewater gathers more information on cannabis, we'll refine that through the sampling process. So we have a long list, and we don't, you know, we charge bakeries different than we charge wineries. We just have a lot of different categories. So. John, do you have further questions?
Well, actually, just at least from a pesticide standpoint, with the marijuana growing, to be sold in California, it has to be pesticide free to be considered organic. to be sold in dispensaries. It cannot have any of the things that other commodities, agricultural commodities may have on it. So at least that's one benefit from the wastewater stream side.
Right, so I'm kind of curious to see in Richmond, because it's going to be a big grow operation, if they're going to go organic or not. From a wastewater perspective, we prefer organic.
Well, if they're going to sell it in the state of California, it has to be organic. That was when it was approved by the voters to be sold in the state of California, it has to be organic free. You should pesticide free. It has to be pesticide free.
I remember during the drought when I was visiting with the various mayors, the mayor of Concord was looking into a hydroponic operation for lettuce. Do we have any other hydroponic thing popping up in the area that would affect wastewater?
I wouldn't say that nothing that we've seen an impact to date on, but it's something that we continue to monitor, and we try to continue to gather data and take samples. Thanks.
So if you have a couple of questions. In our budget, I know that there's unknowns, and because of whoever's head of our country now and his tariffs, it's going to drive up the cost of steel and cement and other raw products radically if the tariffs stay in place. How much cushion do we have in our budget in terms of looking at materials that we have to buy and procure?
Yeah, I can't tell you exactly what the amount of contingency is, but there are two factors. I mean, one, when engineering design is going out, that they do try to update, and we actually already have seen quite a lot of increases in steel prices. But there are buffers that are built into place when we're doing the cost estimates for each one of the projects. And you're right, I mean, we've already seen the impacts from increases in steel price with respect to pipe, and purchasing called me about 6 months ago and said, hey, this is really coming forward. We also, however, do have contingency. And then the last piece that I would say is, with the support of the board, we've tried to, be conservatively realistic with budgeting for revenue items such as, SCCs. So if we have a strong year for SCCs, then we're able to, for example, this year, stock away some of those funds, and that gives us a slightly larger reserve going forward. I will say that at this point, our reserves are stronger than they have been for many years, and so we feel prepared to absorb some increases should those happen. So it's a good question.
The second thing feeds into sort of the reserves. On page 385 of our general manager's report, hydro sales, we budgeted $3.7 million. It looks like we're going to do $10.2 million this year, which is about $6.5 million more than anticipated.
Sorry,
That's in our monthly report.
Oh, in our monthly report.
Page 385.
And that's good news, and it's
Good news, but my question is, maybe I shot myself in the foot asking the questions before. Is there any way with that anticipated revenue on hydro to even soften more the rate increase?
So we anticipate a good year end. Our intention, and I think as was previously characterized by, we saw this coming because we've seen
raining and snowing.
Right, it kept raining and snowing, and we provided you an update in March, and at that time it was close to an all-time record. So we've incorporated this in our projection for the fact that we have not had to borrow and won't have to borrow as much. So that does reduce long-term interest rates for our customers, but that's been factored into the analysis that Sophia has prepared and presented to the board previously. It's a little bit better, but it's not significant compared to where we were.
Oh, it just jumped out when I realized
it's
almost double what we anticipated.
Yeah. And some of that also is built into the change between the January and the March workshops, when we basically were able to bring down the rate increase from the 7 to the 6.5, 6.25, and we were very happy to be able to do so, and we're very thankful for the excellent ratings that we've had that continue to help us support that lower rate recommendation.
That answers all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you. Are we That's, we don't need to take action on that today, right?
No, you need to take action, please. Thank you.
We do?
But the
Yes.
file the report, so this is an
File
action to
report.
file the report, so public hearing for the water and wastewater system, schedule of rates and charges, capacity charges and other fees.
So moved.
All right, moved by Frank Mellon, seconded by Bill Patterson, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? All right, unanimously passed.
This also wasn't one of those we needed to do by, no,
The next time it is.
the next time it is, okay. All right.
All right, general manager's report?
All right, thank you, Board. So in your materials, as was referenced by Director Colin, we have the monthly report, and if I can answer any questions, if you have any. We also have a memo at your places that I'd like to draw your attention to. The next board meeting will be in Castro Valley. It's an opportunity for us to practice our business continuity plan. And as you'll see in the memo there on the first page, we're starting a little later because the library doesn't open until noon, and staff needs the time to work through the logistics with facilities at the library and ensure that everything's ready. So we'll be getting started at 1:30 with finance admin, at 2 o'clock for closed session, and where normally we provide some nourishment during closed session in the form of lunch. This time we'll be providing cookies and coffee and that sort of thing. But if I would just wanting to ask or let you know that you might want to eat beforehand if you're looking for a full meal. I know that influences people's moods. If they don't get a chance to eat.
Yeah, if I don't eat, I'm a real pain in the butt.
Yeah, so I need to.
Good Subway sandwich place
You don't want me to be that way, do you?
No, I'm bringing it to your attention. Also, there's a Speakers Bureau latest, and we have 3 ward briefings in the next 2 weeks. So I believe that staff's had the opportunity to work with Director Mellon. We'll be meeting with Director Coleman after the meeting to review his slide deck, and then we'll be working closely with Director McIntosh, who's unable to be here today. That's what I have. I think I can answer any questions.
Any questions? The general manager's report. All right, reports and director comments. The sustainability.
I'm sorry.
Don't step in. You're fine. You've got your time, John. Reports and directors' comments. The Sustainability, Energy, and Finance Administration Committee minutes are included in your packet. We will now receive reports from the Planning and Legislative Human Resources Committees. And I'll start as a report from the chair on the Planning Committee. The Planning Committee met this morning to receive updates on the Bayfair pumping plant and Estudillo Avenue pipeline replacement project and the San Ramon Valley Recycled Water Program Pump Station R3000 project. John?
Sure. We also had our Human Resources Committee meeting this morning. We already went through the legislative update. We approved it on a 5-0 vote. We had also 2 really good presentations. One was workforce development strategies, working with the Center for Employment Opportunities pilot project and with the support of Local 444. And it's something that sounds really good and good for the community. And then we had a good presentation by somebody who actually went through the wastewater plant operator training program and did a great job in terms of what we're trying to do in reaching out and filling those necessary positions.
Thank you, John. Any other director comments?
I was just going to say, our meeting won't occur until the 28th as planned.
All right. Director's comments? All right. Bill?
I read a lot, maybe too much, but I wanted to speak to the general manager's report this time around. I'm always finding intriguing things, but that was a fine report. I just wanted people to know that that report, to me, peaked out. So, Alex, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Covered the whole parameters.
Good. I just want to also say that that the board briefing that we had with Director Patterson and Director Young, President Young, was very excellent. Really appreciate all the time that staff put into that. I think these board briefings, or these constituent board briefings, are really important. I get a lot of good feedback from it. I know there's sometimes, I would also suggest that we consider holding them in the evening sometime as a change-off. I do get people who say they'd like to attend but can't because they're at their job. They can't take time off for that. But the work of it has been very good.
I do mine at 6 in the morning, it's not a problem. It's on their way to work. Yes, I would like to today to close the meeting in honor of Ellen Tauscher. Congresswoman Ellen Tauscher passed away on April 29th, and she represented the East Bay in Congress from 1997 to 2009. During her tenure, she chaired the New Democratic Coalition and led the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, the Armed Services Committee, which oversees nuclear weapons, missiles defense, and the national labs. She left the Congress to join the State Department as Undersecretary in the Obama administration, where she helped lead negotiations with Russia over the 210 New START Treaty, which cut U.S. and Russian nuclear arsenals. More recently, she served as the University of California Region Chair of the governing boards for Los Alamos and Lawrenceville Board National Labs, and sat on various other boards of directors. She also helped lead a political action committee that supported California Democratic congressional candidates in last year's midterm elections, when the party flipped 7 GOP-held seats in the state of California. While in Congress, Mrs. Tauscher was an active supporter and ally of many district efforts, including the Freeport Project, water recycling and desalinization in our area. She co-authored H.R. 2641, the Cal-Fed Delta Authorization Act, which included language addressing excess capacity of the Freeport Project and a section addressing the beneficiary pays principle for Bay Delta projects. She supported funding for the San Ramon Valley Recycled Water Project. She led the way in securing direct federal assistance of this project, as well as securing authorization for the federal government to do advanced integrated water recycling project. She provided vital assistance for the Freeport Project by supporting the federal government's required permitting approvals, expediting the project's construction. Was keenly interested in EBMUD and was always seeking to deepen her understanding of the issues that are important to EBMUD. She took valuable time from her busy schedule to participate in a helicopter tour of the district's country facilities in 1997. She supported regional desalinization efforts by supporting the authorization of direct federal assistance for the East Bay region to study and value desalinated water projects. On a personal note, I worked very closely with Ellen from before she was elected, and I actually spoke to her probably about 5 weeks ago. And at the time I knew she was ill, but didn't realize how ill she was. She was a personal friend. She worked across the aisle. Her bottom line was she believed in getting things done. It didn't matter what the label was. It's how do you work together to find common goals and common denominator and work from that perspective and make things happen and get it done in a positive way. I'm personally going to miss Ellen a great deal, as many people will, and I'd like to close the meeting in her honor today.
So with no further ado, our meeting is now adjourned in memory of Ellen Tauscher.